very much, Patrick, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many friendly faces. It's a bit nerve-wracking up here. One of the really strong themes that's come through this entire evening is that of relationships and partnerships, and I want to expand on that a little bit and talk about the power of partnerships. And I also want to talk about the role that all of us can play in ensuring that human rights are respected. I acknowledge that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations tonight. It's a particularly significant acknowledgement given the topic on which I'm speaking, and that's the threat of the forced closure of remote communities far away from us in Western Australia. I'm going to say up front that I'm not an Indigenous person. I'm super conscious of that. I'm white, I'm privileged, and I cannot stand here and talk on behalf of Indigenous peoples. But what I've learned in the time that I've been working in this space, that it's precisely because of the privilege that we all have, that it's incumbent on us to do what it is that we can within our spheres of influence to ensure that we work alongside our Indigenous brothers and sisters to support their efforts. For me, I have the enormous privilege of working for one of the country's leading human rights organisations, the Human Rights Law Centre. So in my day-to-day work, I see this privileged position of being able to impact on human rights issues. And in my experience, the most respectful and the most effective way to work on Indigenous rights issues is to work alongside Indigenous communities, organisations and their leaders. And it's to ensure that they have a seat at the table as equal negotiators. And that's kind of why I find myself here tonight talking to you. We've been contacted by a whole range of Indigenous communities and organisations in Western Australia. And they've asked me to share their concerns with you tonight, their grave concerns about what this threat of forced closure will potentially mean for them. They've asked me to convey in the best way that I can their fear, their frustration and their anger. And they've also asked me to seek your support. This is the remote Indigenous community of Umbulgari, which is a name that might be known to some of you. This community's death was a slow one. In 2011, the Western Australian government evicted every single community member from their homes, around about 100 people. They closed down the health clinic, they shut the local school. They forced people off their land. They closed down, eventually, the water supply and the electricity. A couple of years later, bulldozers rolled into Umbulgari. They quite literally dug a hole and into it buried the remains of the town and their homes. And so there are very serious concerns that this is a story that's soon potentially to be replicated in up to 150 remote Indigenous communities in Western Australia. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems almost incomprehensible to me that in 2015, we have a government that's intent on recreating policies that we kind of associated with past centuries of removing Indigenous peoples from their land. And this is all also happening at a time when we're supposedly having a national conversation about recognition of our Indigenous peoples in our constitution. It almost kind of seems Kafkaesque. So what exactly would be the impact of these, the closure of these remote communities? I did have a video tonight from one of our key partners, Tammy Solonek. She's a strong and proud Indigenous woman from the Kimberley region. We've had a few technical issues, so I am very disappointed that we're not able to share the words that she wanted to express. I thought I'd get Devon maybe just to draw a quick little cartoon to encapsulate what she was going to say. No, I won't ask you to do that. But what Tammy spoke really powerfully to, and why I'm sad that she's not able to convey it to you, but she spoke about the close connection, and not just the close connection, but the importance of land and culture to Indigenous peoples. That's not something that I'm able to portray to you. And she talks about it almost being as a religion for Indigenous peoples and the deep obligations that they have to their land and their culture. And despite what a lot of us hear in the mainstream media, it's actually, I think, almost surprising to learn that health outcomes for Indigenous peoples who live on their ancestral lands overall are significantly better. So for things like life expectancy in particular, people living on their land are living active traditional lives, they're empowered and they're engaged. And they also don't fall into moving into larger communities or larger towns where there's the trappings of things such as alcohol and smoking. And maybe I should also mention racial profiling and gambling addiction as well. So I don't want to stand here and pretend that there aren't remote communities that don't have serious problems, but surely the response from government to addressing these problems can't be to just simply shut these communities down. And so it's for this reason that a large number of organisations, both internationally, nationally, and at the very grassroots level, have come together. And the shared principal concern of those organisations is to ensure that Indigenous communities themselves are able to meaningfully participate in the decisions which will directly impact them. So I guess the question is, how do we do this, and why should you support the Human Rights Law Centre and our partners? Our strategy involves three key elements. The first is engagement and empowerment. There's very little information that's actually coming from the Western Australian government about what's going on. So this state of uncertainty, as you could imagine, is causing huge fear and anxiety in many, many communities. So we need to get information to communities on the ground so that they know what's going on. And we need to support and give them resources and materials so that they can ensure that they know what's going on and that their voices are heard in this process. The second key element is holding governments to account. Governments have legal obligations. They also have constituents to whom they're responsible. And the third key element is ensuring that we have coordinated collective impact. There's no one organisation that has all of the answers or that can undertake all of these activities. So Indigenous partners have come to an organisation, the Human Rights Law Centre, because they know the work that we've done in this space. We've got a proven track record of forming powerful alliances to work systemically on change. We work in strategic partnerships and we have a variety of tactics that we're able to engage and use to address this important issue. The funds that are raised tonight will enable us to dedicate one of our staff members 2 days a week to support and resource this important alliance of organisations and to lend our experience to that work. Funds will also be dedicated to that coalition of organisations so that we can employ a project officer on the ground to work closely with those directly affected communities. What's at stake here is the connection to country that's enjoyed by some of our planet's oldest continuing cultures. The communities that we know in the context are unique to our beautiful country, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to do what it is that we can to defend and to support them. Thank you very much for your attention.